Good day to all of you who are in the online 801 course. I am recording this to give you some insight into what I did on last Friday evening with the 801 blended model. So I want to just go through these particular slides so that as your team is working on developing its challenge, you'll have the same information base that I gave them. So with that, again, as I always say, Delbert is such an interesting individual for really finding out what leadership is all about. And he also has talked about it in relationship to creativity. So again, as I've said to all of you, that short overview, one pager about are you creative, what do you think creativity is, serves as the baseline for the 10 weeks that you are delving into this, and you'll look at it again at the end of the course to see what changes have taken place with you over that period of time. So again, as I say to all of you, is that this course is really designed to get you to think about whether or not the way in which we're structured today is really going to help our kids to deal with the emerging realities. And last night, Sean McDonald gave a presentation of how an architect looks at the space and developing a space. And hopefully that will help your team to think about these concepts in a little bit more detail. So with that, then again, the purpose is really to understand divergent and convergent thinking. What design thinking is about is understanding the flow of both of those. Divergent is more or less looking for patterns of relationships and connections within systems, and convergent is rather linear. So it's a process that starts from A, it goes to B, to C, to D. But again, both of these are important, and the Puccio book in particular helps you to look at the types of skills that are necessary related to that. And then really, the other component of this is to get you to look at your deeper assumptions about creativity. We talked about that in the initial Zoom, but I just want to make sure that you are constantly thinking about the process. So again, what you're doing, to reiterate about this, is that you're looking at the materials from 800 and 845 and how these really begin to integrate into this process of design thinking as your team begins to look at coming up with different environments for the future. So really what the 10 weeks then is really about is to get you to experience in a 10-week period of time what this creative process is about. And so that's what you're going to be looking at. And then finally, the real focus is your team's going to come up with a physical space. What does this environment look like? Drawing upon the material that you heard last night from Sean from Perkin Eastman when they're looking at designing that. I want you to look at it, but I also want you to understand the flow of information within a system. And that flow is, how is the curriculum designed? How is it reorganized because of technology? How does the system of work change for both teachers and students within this learning environment, and the leadership that is necessary to make this environment to become sustainable? Again, that is the end product of what you are producing. And then finally, I want you to think about, what's the implementation strategies that are going to be necessary for this project to start to your final vision of what your school or your learning environment will look like. So again, this is that quick overview. So your design team then is now looking at all of this data. You're doing an analysis of the data that I've given you. And then through that process, what you will do is come up with a new form of learning environments for the future. So what I want you to think about, and what they did Friday night, was I'd like your team should be looking at 5 issues that your students or kids are going to face within their future. So your team should be exploring that particular question. You know, what are the issues that you believe your kids are going to be exploring? And then, you know, to kind of juxtaposition those with 5 challenges you see that's facing education and educators in the future. So, for example, we do have a new direction from the Department of Education at the federal level that is looking at the concept of choice, giving parents more choice. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, the question, though, is the direction is looking at choice. How does that impact educators, education in general, going in the future? So at least for 4 years, that's going to be the focus. Now, what are some of the other challenges that are facing us? So again, what your team should be looking at is the Wall Street Journal, the Jeffrey Sachs material. Obviously, you're not doing executive weekend, but all the material that is there in those resources that are available for you. So there, you're looking at this, you're doing an environmental scan. And another way of looking at this is that you're doing a qualitative research, that you're looking at this data. What does it mean? So you're looking for patterns. You're looking for themes that seem to be emerging out of all of this material. Now, one of the things that you saw on your video of young Zhao is that basically what he's saying in the future is that education has to become personalized. There has to be a movement towards away really from standardized content in allowing students then to pursue their own passions and strength. So that's important for you to think about as you look at all that data that you're exploring. Also, Zhao says we have to be really product-oriented. We need to move away from just project-based learning to a concept that we get kids to begin to engage in entrepreneurial activities, and that these activities are really getting them to produce something that is authentic, that it's real, it's usable, or they're producing a service that will be usable for people. So that is another concept that Zhao talks greatly about. And then finally, he says that we have to globalize the campus. We have to move from local, isolated physical spaces to more global and virtual spaces. And that's a reality, that as your team is looking at its own project, how does it connect with learning across, you know, the planet? So that's what Zhao is talking about in his presentation that you watched. Now, one thing I think is very important for you to think about is this. Back in the 70s, Robert Pirsig wrote that famous book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he made a very interesting statement in there that if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, meaning the assumptions, the mental models, then all you're going to do is recreate another factory. And that is a very important concept for you to think about, because one of the reasons when you look at reform over the last 20 or 30 years, that in reality, we really don't reform. We really don't change anything. We might, you know, integrate technology or maker spaces and things like that into the present structure, but the typical day, the schedule, everything remains the same because we have not gotten to the deeper level. And if you think about both systems thinking, the structures that are in place, the mental models that drive those structures, and if you think about it from Theory U, is that we're constantly downloading the same old, same old. So I want your team to think about this concept, but I also then really want you to think about the rationality that's underlying our present system. And the way in which I look at it is, and if you think about Russell Acuff's book back in 800, really it's the 17th and the 20th century thinking that still is very predominant in all of us. And that comes from Galileo in terms of looking at the universe as a machine, as clock-like work, and also Rene Descartes when he made the statement about, I think, therefore I am. And if you think about the concept of open mind, open heart, and open will, that he obliterated those concepts because he created the sense that rationality overcomes everything else and really separated the mind from the body. And then we add this individual, and this individual here is Frederick Taylor, scientific management. And those concepts in the 20th century, which made particularly America one of the strongest powers in the world, is that this concept of not divergent, but convergent thinking, of creating organizational structures that are based on command and control, that everything has to be standardized, became the way. Now, these particular models are still very, very powerful in our thinking because, again, we're all products of this system. So looking at what really are the systemic structures, if, in a very simplistic way, if you look at a school district today, this is the way they're operating. You have a superintendent, you have a district office, you have a business office, you have an elementary, and you have a secondary. You might have middle school in there. And if you're at a university level, you have the office of the president, you have the bursar's office, you have the provost's office, and then you have all these different departments. They're all broken down into these different types of silos. So this is what is there. And if you're in a business, the same thing, you generally see organizational charts. So again, I want you to think about that in relationship to the structural issues that you're dealing with when it comes to, the organization of learning environments in schools. So let's look at the mental models that are at play. So industrialism in the schools. So what you really begin to look at is that in the 19th century, it was clear that if we're going to really industrialize, we need to fix this way or find a way to break the inherently free human spirit during childhood. So we got to control them. We have to create structures that will allow for control. And so what comes out of this process is that many of our thinkers in the 19th century really, and into the 20th century, said we have to create environments where kids are going to be obedient, they're going to follow orders, they're going to perform highly monotonous tasks without rebelling. So we had great immigration during that period of time into this country. And so the schools were structured in order to deal with these types of ideas in order for them to be able to work on assembly lines in the industrial model. So again, I want you to think about to be obedient, to follow orders, to perform highly monotonous tasks, whether or not these particular mindsets are still present today in the 21st century within the structure of schools and the daily operation of a school. And then also industrialism led to mass schooling. And again, it was okay. I mean, it helped this country to grow economically to become what one might call a superpower in the world. And then finally, one of the things is that the 3 R's then were really the ability for being able to engage in rudimentary written communication and perform simple office functions and to understand basic instructions. That's what the model was based upon. It was based upon an idea that you have smart people and you have dumb people and you have in between. And therefore the way in which we track people within the organization of the curriculum that was powerful. It was based upon a lot of these particular concepts. And so when you talk about changing schools, generally communities sometimes will fight them because, well, will it get our kids into college? Will it do this? Will it do that? So again, that's what your team should be really looking at as we look at this particular structure, because that's the structure that we have in place today. And I could also add, 13, 14, 15, and 16 to add the colleges to this. But, as Robert Fritz states, if we fail to understand the powerful nature of structure, we're going to be less able to create new and desired outcomes. So you need to think about how structure shapes the behavior of people over time and what are the underlying assumptions that underpin that structure. So these are things that you should be thinking about and your team should be thinking about. Now, what's happening though in the 21st century, and we've looked at this, those of you who had me in 800, is that really systemic thinking systemically is coming into play, and that we're really now starting to understand that organizations are not designed around a clock mechanism or a well-oiled machine, that really we're drawing from our understanding of ecology, that we're looking at web-like networks, and that the concept of adaptability, diversity, and creativity are the processes that are driving both the economic development of our country and, for that matter, the global marketplace, in that the more we are getting students and ourselves to understand how these are then implemented structurally, then if we don't do that, we're going to be doing disservice to our kids. So again, these concepts you should be thinking about, and as you think about this, and the individual who said this is the picture of Feature Capra, the physicist, who's doing quite a bit of work right now with eco-literacy, and particularly looking at food and kids. What he's basically saying is to build a sustainable society, and look at what you were reading about in Sengi's book, The Necessary Revolution, blending economic and both ecological sustainability. So what really Capra's saying is that we have to fundamentally redesign many of our technology and social institutions so that they're able to bridge that gap between human design and ecological sustainable systems of nature. So these concepts, I think, are important for your team to grapple with as you think about what your challenge is going to be and what schools need to be in the future. Because really, knowledge, innovation, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, and creativity, these are the things we're now beginning to hear a lot about. They're the buzzwords. These are the skills that every kid needs to master based on their own aspirations of the future. So the fundamental question that you have to deal with, are we structured today under our present educational system to allow these things to emerge? And if not, what needs to happen in order for this to take place? So again, this is what your team should be really focusing upon. Then again, remember the three divides that Sharma talks about. The ecological divide, that we're using more resources than this planet is able to reproduce or sustain. So nature, self to nature becomes an important component. That social divide, looking at the fact that on this planet, 2.5 billion people out of the 7 billion people that are on this planet live way below the poverty level. So the question is, even in our country, the debate between the 99% and the 1%, the self to others, how we treat each other, is extremely important. And then finally, you know, when Sharma talks about the spiritual cultural divide, and that number 3 is very important, because there's 3 times more people committing suicide than there are from the combined total of deaths related to war or accidents or natural causes. So again, as your team then begins to think about this reality, and all this data is verified by many sources and organizations, either coming out of the United Nations or our own Department of Labor or economics, etc. So this data is there. So the question is, how does it fit into the design of the types of curriculums that our kids need to think about? So again, drawing upon what you learned in 845 becomes an important concept as we look at this. And so really, I want you to think about, you know, how this plays into what you're reading from Sachs, what you're understanding from Otto Scharmer's work, and what type of curriculum needs to emerge for our kids. So something to think about, you know, from a technological point of view, which I think is important, that if you go back historically or prehistory, that physical labor was the way in which we dealt with things. Then what emerged was really what we'll call the age of steam and coal. So again, that really powered the early industrial revolution, and now we're in the age of hydrocarbons, but underlying that now is a digital age. So if you begin to think about this, and you watch that video called Humans Need Not Apply, and if you don't remember it from the other courses, I strongly suggest just go out to YouTube and type in Humans Need Not Apply, and it will give you a good sense of what's really going to happen to our kids in the future because of digital technology. And so what I want you to think about is a book called The Second Machine Age. And when you take the course 802, that's going to be one of the books that you will be reading. But these gentlemen from MIT basically have promoted a very interesting concept. And here's a couple of things I want your team to think about. So the first one is this idea of general purpose technologies. So deep new technologies are emerging, and they're adding to information and communication technology. They have tremendous impact on all sectors of the economy. And I want you to think about that. So he says really the surge in this use of digital technology really has 2 profound consequences. One is there's new ways of acquiring knowledge. And I'm sure you all know that. And that there's a high rate of innovation that is taking place because of this access. So entrepreneurialism is all over the place. Look at the new types of digital technologies that are constantly emerging. So that's a world in which you're preparing our kids for, and that they really say that the true work of innovation really is not coming up with something new, but instead it's recombining things that already exist. And I think that's a powerful concept that you need to think about as you look at the distinction between creativity and innovation. And when you watch those videos, John Keogh's video in particular, I think these are important concepts that as emerging leaders, you definitely need to think about. They also say, like language, printing, and the library or universal education, that really the global digital networks really help to recombine this innovation. This is where, when you think about what Young Zhao is talking about, that this is very true, is that kids are not going to come up with something new, but they're going to recombine old ideas into something new. And so the question is, how do you design spaces for that to take place within our educational system, and how will you design that into your concepts? And then finally, this is very important, so that self-organizing learning environments really are the skills that to create these is that ideation, large frame pattern recognition, and complex communications are the 3 R's. That's what we need in this new machine age or digital age. And in their book, the #1 place you can find that today in schools is Montessori schools. And so I highly recommend that you look at the underlying principles, which are these in terms of Montessori schools. And as they point out, Amazon, Google, all of these people, I believe the founder of SpaceX and the founder who's also Solar City and places like that, all of these people have gone to Montessori schools. And so the question then is, if Montessori is an approach that seems to be more attuned to the 21st century instead of the 20th or the 19th century, it's something we need to begin to explore as a major component for learning in the future. So I want you to think about these particular concepts. So when you begin to think about that list that you created or you will create, I want you then definitely to get into the school works material that is available for you. And really, and I'll go through this very quickly, is that really the concept of new types of social and financial infrastructures are beginning to emerge. So again, these are the disruptive factors. The other factor is what they call high fidelity living. And what that basically means is that there's deeper insight into the neurosciences that are definitely changing the way in which we understand about how learning takes place. And if you notice there towards the end, the idea of intrinsic motivation and creativity are important. So as you're reading Dan Pink's book, take a look at that concept that he has explored as it relates to motivation. And that the deinstitutionalized production is something that is very important. So there's a shift from a workforce to a talent cloud will occur. In that when you begin to look at Indeed or you begin to look at LinkedIn and you look at the specialized skills that are there, that's how there's a global network taking place, and that this is something our kids need to understand, because getting a job in the traditional old model will no longer be the types of ways in which kids are going to develop careers. Customized value webs. And so what they're talking about here is bring your own device movement. Is that very well might create bring your own school movement. So when you look at the work of Sergio Mitra with the school in the wall, hole in the wall with the use of computers in India, this really begins to show how new intermediaries, learning agents, the way in which learners now collaborate. So that's going to challenge the system of work, which is presently within our schools. And then this is a very interesting concept they talk about, is this idea of shareable cities. So those who live in urban environments are going to look for new patterns of governance, new levels of citizen engagement. No matter what the political climate is now, you're seeing the backlash to it, and a lot of these things are beginning to emerge, whether it was way back in 2008 with the emergence of then the so-called Tea Party, or whether it's the emergence of the resistance today. These are things that are being viewed as major disruptors within our culture. And what they talk about then is, how does this play out in schools? Well, schools are going to take many forms. And as I said to you, this movement towards choice is very important. Self-organizing groups. Learners and families will create individual learning playlists. So think about the way in which we got music with playlists, that learning will be are forming our own playlist for ourselves and for our kids, and that really radical personalization will become the norm, with learning approaches and supports that are tailored to each individual learner. So I want you to think about, how that plays out, and that the educator job is going to diversify. There's going to be many new types of learning agents, whether it be the early movement with Khan Academy, or it be the use of MOOCs or flipped classrooms. Any of these things are going to happen, which is going to change our system of work. And that there's going to be a variety of different digital networks and platforms. Obviously, we're seeing that constantly happening. And that at the same time, geographic and virtual communities are going to take ownership for learning in new ways. So I want you to think about that in relationship to your design. And again, credentialing, the traditional degree is no longer going to be the major focal point, but the idea of credentials and certificate and badges are going to be really the focal point going forward. So again, given these trends, what might the future of learning become? So this is part of your challenge that you will be looking at over the remaining weeks of this course. So again, just to show, the national, that Time Magazine, last year was showing, here are types of things: textbooks that learn about students, that they customize, that desks that foster more collaboration, moving around, touchscreen chalkboards, going differently, from our smart boards that we have, toys that teach empathy, that particularly getting kids to understand diversity and different points of view, cell phones that teachers ask kids to turn on, and that finally, printers that redefine hands-on learning, so 3D printers. So again, in mass media, you're beginning to, see these things emerge. Another example, an issue of the Smithsonian, what are some things they were looking at in the next decade, which I found interesting, is that, scientists they're working towards a future of bioengineered organs, and 74% of Americans say this is a good thing. This is what technology should be looking at. Researchers are, breaching the boundaries of the mind, moving information. Monkeys, can use their brain to control, virtually objects, and human beings now can do that. There's pictures, if you remember the robot Baxter, that you can now, and you can buy these things. You can buy these interfaces that you put on your head that connect to digital devices, and you control them with your thoughts. So this is not science fiction anymore. It is real. And so these are things that, again, are not make-believe. And as Ray Kurzweil said, technological change is going to be so rapid, its impact so deep, that humans are going to transform. And when you get into 802, we'll spend more time. So again, how do these things relate to, the things that you are generating, that you are beginning to look at? So defining your challenge, again, is very simply this: how might we redesign our schools in order to meet students' needs of the world of the 21st century? And so you're going to be looking at the system, you're going to look at the curriculum, you're going to look at physical spaces. And again, all of this material is available to you in those particular folders that I have for you. So designing systems about balance complexity, the different stakeholders, what is your system going to be looking at? You're going to, that did twice. So embedded in the system, then you're going to talk about curriculum, you're going to talk about this idea of spaces. We started that last night with that. And so physical environment, flow of information, the type of work that's going to take place, these are the things that I want you to explore. So I hope this quick overview is giving you a little more insight. These are things that we talked about last Friday night with the blended course. So those of you online, I felt that it was important to share this information with you as you're going forward. And as usual, if you do have any questions about this, please feel free at any time to contact me. And so look forward to my voice announcement this coming Sunday to give you more direction on where we are going. So with that, I hope that you all are enjoying the development of your challenge.